Well, hi, and first I just want to thank Andrew for inviting me. It's a real honor to be invited as a key speaker. It's also a little embarrassing because I don't really know why I should be a key speaker. I don't feel like I have any particular authority. But so I just want to simply share with you some reflections that I have bouncing off the idea of heretical sound synthesis, and then discuss or present or show you a few of the things that I've done. So that makes it a two-part talk, and with no guarantee about the relationship between the two parts.
Are we supposed to see something?
No, you're supposed to not see anything.
No.
You shouldn't see that either. I don't know how to mute it.
We just close our eyes. It's fine.
I could put a blank
Yeah, maybe that's
it'd be better.
That's better than switch it off.
Because I have a lot of, and then I have to turn mirroring off if it's on.
It's
See, yeah, so you're not supposed to see that. Turn mirror off. So this should be Hawaii, yeah. Okay. But it's changed my resolution, so you got to give me a second here. Scale. Yeah, tiny. Did that screw up the resolution? No, that's fine. All right. So, all right. So, I guess what I can say maybe about why I should be, maybe why I'm here, is that I discovered really early on that a certain, as I was starting to record music, that a kind of orientation that I had just naturally, which now I can call a heretical attitude, was really essential to my compositional processes. In fact, I don't think I would have ever composed anything if I didn't have this attitude. And it happens, it just so happens that I've been thinking a lot about this recently, thanks to a few certain experiences that I won't go into. And I've been like thinking about it a lot and reading texts by artists and talking about it with my students. It's like I teach DSP and acoustics and psychoacoustics, and I just imposed on them the aesthetics hour. So at the beginning of the course, we just talk about like stuff, because I came to realize that the conservatory world is a really closed world. And so I decided it was more important to try to open that up than to teach them, I don't know, another thing like composition. They can learn stuff like that on their own. So anyway, so in preparing this talk, I pulled together like way too much stuff. And I've been reading it down. And I hope I arrive at doing that reasonably. And anyway, I'll just skip ahead. If I find that it's getting to be too heavy and too slow. So, heresy. I was really intrigued by this title. And so I just like, well, why did they come up with this heretical sound synthesis idea? What is heresy? So I just looked around and found some definitions in the dictionary. So a heretic is a person believing in or practicing religious heresy. And religious heresy is a belief or opinion contrary to orthodox religious doctrine. And then, by extension, a heretic, or metaphorically, that's like the proper meaning, and then the metaphorical meanings that we use, is a person holding an opinion at odds with what is generally accepted. And so a heresy is an opinion profoundly at odds with what is generally accepted. So, heresy then is to be at odds with some dominant, generally accepted order. And at odds with means in conflict with or in variance with. Some synonyms for at odds are in conflict, in opposition, clashing, disagreeing, or in variance, not in keeping, out of line, out of step, differing, contrary, incompatible, contradictory, and so on. So either some kind of active opposition or just difference, simply. And there's a little further explanation that I ran across in Wikipedia. These expanded metaphoric senses, though, a heretic, not as a religious heretic, but in some metaphorical sense, allude both to the difference between the person's views and the mainstream, and the boldness of such a person in propounding these views. So, a heretic not only has some different idea, that is different from or incompatible with what is generally accepted, but he expresses it or acts on it boldly. And some synonyms: dissident for heretic, dissident, dissenter, nonconformist, unorthodox thinker, heterodox thinker, free thinker, apostate, iconoclast, renegade, skeptic, agnostic, atheist, non-believer, pagan, heathen. All these things are generally synonyms for a heretic. And all of this, as I was just like pulling together this, like, okay, what does this mean? Made me think of the very famous passage from Thoreau's Walden, John Sight. If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measured or far away. So a heretic then is someone who is at odds with an existing order. He's either in opposition with it or in variance with it. And therefore, what is heretical obviously depends on the existing order. What is heretical in one environment will not be heretical in another environment. And the heretic then may be someone who consciously sets himself up to actively oppose an existing order in some way or other, or he may be someone who just goes his own way. And it turns out that in going his own way, he clashes with the norm. And in this case, he becomes a heretic, not because of what he does, but because of the norm. So, after all this, generalities, what I think that a heretical synthesis would be quite simply someone who is active in the world of sound synthesis, who's either somehow working against an existing order of sound, or simply doing something else, boldly. So, a free spirit, a free thinker, a free electron, a nomad, an outsider, a foreigner. And I might even say, an artist. Edgar Varese writes, reverence for the past no doubt is a virtue that has its uses. But if we're to go forward, the reverent approach to old difficulties is the wrong one. The very basis of creative work is irreverence. The very basis of creative work is experimentation, bold experimentation. So, in this context here, we could say the very basis of creative work is heresy. Heresy meaning dead, irreverence, and bold experimentation. Marcel Duchamp wrote, I think in the 1930s, I forgot to note it, what is wrong with art today is that there is no spirit of revolt, no new ideas emerging from the young artists. They walk in the footsteps of their predecessors, trying to do better. In art, perfection does not exist. And an artistic pause always results when the artists of a given period limit themselves to carrying out the work of a predecessor, picking it up where he abandoned it, trying to continue what he did. Art is produced by a series of individuals who express themselves personally. It is not a question of progress. The idea of progress is nothing but an outrageous pretension on our part. So we could say that on the basis of this idea, which I find profoundly meaningful. I actually ran across this a while ago. A few years ago, I re-ran across it. And I printed it up on a piece of paper and I stuck it up in the room where I teach. So we could say in this context that art is produced not by those who follow reverently in the footsteps of their fathers, but by heretics. And that the history of art is the history of these heretics. Because Varese continues from what he said before, you only have to turn to the revered past for a corroboration of my contention. The links in the chain of tradition are formed by men who have all been revolutionists. And Nietzsche takes this principle beyond the realms of art and music. He says, whoever has overthrown an existing law of custom has hitherto always first been accounted a bad man. But when the law could not afterwards be reinstated, and this fact was accepted, the predicate gradually changed. History treats almost exclusively of these bad men, who subsequently became good men. So, art is made by heretics, who later might become canonized. And his canonization is where fossilization sets in. New laws and dogmas are established, and that, in turn, spawns the need for new heretics to take their place. Jean Dubuffet writes, art, in essence, is innovation, newness, freshness, originality. There is only one healthy form of government for artistic creation: permanent revolution. And therefore, the function of an artist is essentially that of an inventor. So, in order to invent new things, you have to either oppose an existing order, some norms that are set up by the culture, the environment, or you have to ignore it. And then we get to what I was talking about at the beginning of the heretic. So in order to be an inventor in this realm, it's inevitable that you have to have some kind of a heretical, let's say, attitude. Duchamp says, coming back to Marcel Duchamp, there are two kinds of artists: the professional painters, who work with society and therefore cannot help but become a part of it, and the others, the mavericks, the irregular, unlisted soldiers, who are free of obligations and therefore free of hobbles, shackles, constraints. The danger is always to please one's immediate public, those who surround you, who welcome you, who validate you, who grant you success, and all the rest. So, let's think for a minute about what hobbles are, what shackles are. I actually downloaded a bunch of images from the internet. It seems a little overdramatic to show you them. Hobbles are the things you attach to horses' feet so they can't walk. And there are different kinds, I learned. There's the ones that attach the two front feet, there's one that attach one foot like that, there's the ones that attach 3 feet together, or that attach the two side feet. It really keeps them from moving. That's what a profession, that's it. And shackles are the same thing for humans. Handcuffs and all the chains that keep the prisoner from going away. And that's the image that Duchamp is giving us of the professional artist. It's just the mavericks who aren't shackled, who are free of these shackles, these hobbles. So back to Jean Dubuffet, he says, I for one hold in high esteem the values of la sauvagerie. So this is the sauvage that's in the title. And in fact, the title of my presentation, Honneur aux valeurs sauvages, is just the title of a text by Jean Dubuffet. So what does it mean, sauvage? It means undomesticated, wild, free, untamed. So an animal sauvage is a wild animal. It means uncultivated. So like plants that aren't put in the ground so that they can grow for some purpose, but they just grow all by themselves. It means primitive, uncivilized, barbarian, savage. So the values of la sauvagerie would be the values of wilderness, of wildness, of freedom, of what hasn't been tamed or domesticated, what hasn't been planted in order to produce some purpose, serve some purpose, something primordial, primitive, uncivilized. So, he says, I, for one, hold in high esteem the values of wildness, freedom, and so on. Instinct, passion, whim, or caprice, violence, delirium. Now, I don't mean to imply that these values are lacking in our Western culture. Not at all. But the values glorified by our culture don't seem to me to be in keeping with the true movements of our thought. So, at this point, I should go on at enormous length about Dubuffet and his anti-cultural positions and art brut and so on. The dangers of success, essentially. Dangers of being successful, of approbation, and the tendency we all have of mimeticism, of doing what everybody else is doing. And so the value of authenticity. But I'm just going to skip ahead so we can move along. So anyway, the essence of all this is freedom. Freedom from the laws of custom, society, culture. Freedom from our knowledge about what is good, what's right, what's correct, what you should do. Freedom from outside influences, and freedom from the need for recognition, for approval. And back to Thoreau, stepping to the music that you hear. So another way of seeing this. So anyway, Dubuffet goes into art brut, and let's just say, as a kind of ideal, are the people who have been completely isolated from culture. That is, mostly they're crazy, but some of them are just otherwise completely isolated, so they're not influenced by how you're supposed to paint. They just do stuff, what they do, like from their innermost depths. And they're not doing it in order to get famous or to make money. They're just doing it. And so this is kind of an ideal of like the artist. But another way of seeing this is to say that creation requires a state of innocence. So Dubuffet speaks of children. I guess I'll just read this. I'm going to try to erase it. So, children, he writes, are much more free than adults of the inhibitions created by the prestige of approved ordinary art. They do what pleases them and without worrying about whether you're going to laugh at it or not. They don't feel any need to discern the beautiful, to do something right, to do it correctly, to do it well as it should be done. For them, everything is permitted. And this is exactly the position that is necessary for true, healthy artistic creation. This is the position in which artists should remain, or to which he should return. It's the position that we expect of an artist, that an artist should assume. This precious position, being excused from the knowledge of the right way to do things. Every child has it. Children are outside social matters. They're outside the law. They're asocial. They're alienated. And this is exactly what an artist should be. Dunakis says something similar that I haven't actually finished translating here, so I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to say it. But the basic idea is that as adults, we perceive and think and process all new information in terms of categories. categories that we learned, categories that we learned from our species, categories that we learned from our culture and from our own personal experience. And we're very seldom in contact with the raw data that's presented by our senses. So everything is categorized. And a child doesn't have that yet, as badly as we do. And an artist, in returning to the condition of a child, is one of his primary functions is to break free of these categories. And so what Xenakis, what Xenakis says is, you should always be an immigrant. Because the immigrant comes into a new culture and he doesn't know how you're supposed to act. And all the information, and so he doesn't act right. And all the information that he receives in a fresh way. We'll just leave it at that. And of course, he was an immigrant. And a heretical. So all this about art in general, but not really talking about synthesis per se. And I can just quickly say sound synthesis, we can just generalize and say methods for generating sound technique, for whatever technique. So I think that an artist, after all this, is by nature a heretic, has this disposition, and that heretical synthesis is an artist who focuses his creative energies on synthesis, on the creation of sound. So in what I've done, I found there are like two aspects of composing. Composing with the sounds, which involve putting the sounds together to make a piece, and composing the sounds, so synthesizing. And for me, always composing the sounds has always been at least as important or more important than composing with the sounds. And more, in fact, composing the sounds is becoming literally composing the pieces, as you mentioned. So the form, the music, the overall result, the overall piece is not something that's imposed upon the sound. It's something that grows out of the sound. So I don't make sounds in order to fit them into some box, into some place in a structure. The sounds aren't just something I'm going to use to make music. Instead, the music and all that it communicates grows out of the sound material itself in a very organic way. And again, Varese says something like that, where he says that form is a result of a process, and every one of my works discovers its own form. He draws an analogy with crystallization, which I'll just summarize it, that the internal structure of a crystal is based on a certain way the atoms can group. And that extends out into space and makes the whole crystal. And there's a very small variety in the amount on the internal structures, but the external structure there's a great variety of the same kind of crystal, can have all sorts of different external forms. And so the form is a result of this process, is a result rather than a primary attribute. And he says then, this is a consequence, and the form is a consequence. And this is a way, this suggests better than any other explanation of like how my works are formed. So everything really starts with the sound and builds out of the sound. And composing the sound is composing the essence of music. So once before a concert, there was a young Korean student who was sitting next to me, and he was very good at asking questions. And while we were waiting for things to set up, he said, what do you look for most when you compose? And I sat there for a long time, very quietly. And then I finally came up with an answer. And it was, for the sounds to speak. Which means that the sounds open up onto some reality beyond themselves. That they live independently of me, independently of my volition and desire. That they express truths from some other dimensions that I can only sort of glimpse. So, this is what I experience as the transcendence of sound. It's no longer just sound, just acoustic information. This just comes to me, but it's kind of trite, but like messages from beyond. It's like there's something being said here. So this speaking, which by the way comes from Pierre Schaeffer, that this idea of the speaking is the object, the speaking of the object has something to say, not necessarily me as a composer. Which, by the way, I've heard in a lot of what everybody's doing is where the interactive, this relation to an algorithm or whatever, that it's not just using the means to express something, but get the medium to speak. Anyway, I think this speaking is not like some abstract intellectual conceptual proposition. I think it's much more primitive, primary, spiritual, sauvage. And I've been quoting a certain passage from Juan Miró for years now, every time I get the opportunity, and so I'm going to quote it again because it's right on target for me. He writes, "More and more I strive to achieve the greatest possible clarity, force, and artistic aggressiveness. That is, to provoke first a physical sensation in order to arrive afterwards at the soul." So how music, how art can arrive at our souls, at our minds, at our intellect is through a physical sensation. It's because it has an impact on us. How it can change us and help us to expand our minds and grow and so on is through this physical sensation, often through a sensory shock or lived experience, visceral experience. And I think this is how music really works. I think this is why it moves us. I think we listen to music with our guts first. I know it doesn't mean it has to be pounding, but I mean just with our insides. And I think this is true not just of like harsh noise, but I think this is true of Josquin des Prés, Bach. That we receive some experience, and somehow that touches things that are deep inside us, below the levels of concepts and language, and it's that moves us. So I think it's a really primitive experience, or I could say sauvage, to try to keep tying it to my title. I think just the experience of listening is a very primitive thing, very primordial, and it addresses to all levels of our being, and particularly to those levels that are beneath the levels of language and concepts. Antonin Artaud, he says essentially the same thing as Miró, but even more succinctly. He says, "It is through the skin that we can make metaphysics enter the mind." And in another passage, he talks where he's talking, he's developing like these manifest of the theater of cruelty. Okay, so he talks specifically at one point about sounds, and they play a big role in his ideas about this. But here he really goes right to the point. He says, "The necessity of acting directly and profoundly on the understanding through the physical organs incites us to seek qualities and vibrations of sound that are absolutely unusual." He wrote this in, I think, 1930. Current musical instruments lack these qualities, and this drives us to the use of old and forgotten instruments, or to the creation of new ones. It also drives us to seek, outside of music, instruments and devices made on the basis of specific uncommon fusions or new metallic alloys that can attain a new range of octaves and produce intense penetrating sounds, noises that are unbearable and extreme. On a point here, it's not just noise for the sake of noise, but because that's the way to get to the soul. Or it has to pass through the skin. So it's not just a question of creating an impact for to create a sensation, but in order to act on the understanding. So to make metaphysics, as he said, enter the mind. So in my case, it's for these reasons that I'm really interested in the raw materiality of sound itself and the physical impact of this raw materiality. What that experience communicates or means or does to us, how it acts on us. So in Huddersfield, a few years back, they put out a book called Noise in and as Music, in which they compiled articles by interviews with various people who practice some form of noise music. And they asked me to do an interview, and so I accepted. And the questions for the interview were the same for everyone. What is noise, parentheses, music, to you? Why do you make it? Well, I thought about this for a long time, just like with this Korean student at the concert. And then finally I came up with my interview. What is noise music to you? Noise is a manifestation of truth. Why do you make it? To be in touch, in an immediate and total connection with the real. To participate in the opening up of what is undisclosed and unexplained. To be drawn into a vortex of primal energy. So, now I come to the second part, 11:17. When did I start? Late.
11:43.
Oh, I'm sorry, this is French time.
So we go to 12.
Okay. Okay, so now we come to the part where I tell you a little bit about my practice and show you some of the things that I've done and things that I'm doing. And I guess, like from the beginning, I had a kind of unorthodox experimental approach. I just remember, and so what I'm going to do actually is instead of presenting like one project in detail and explaining, I'm going to just try to move through different things and play different sounds. And so I'm not going to go too much into any depth, but try to sample. So a long, long time ago, when I first decided I wanted to work with electronics and make music with it, I made a series, it's the very first pieces, and that I made, I was using 2 borrowed cassette tape recorders and microphones. So the recorders were portable, they were Marantz or something, borrowed from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where my girlfriend was taking classes. And they had integrated speakers. And I discovered accidentally that if I took one of the microphones and I put it in front of the speakers, it made some really interesting sounds. So that's some fantastic noises. So I played that instrument. And the recorders also had integrated microphones. I guess like a computer. And I discovered that if I held the recorder inside a metal bucket, or like a wash basin, with the microphone smashed against the metal, and I dragged that metal bucket around on a concrete sidewalk, it made really fantastic sounds. So with those beginnings, then I decided this was a fun thing to do, and over the course of time, I began really making more and more electronic music. So I used whatever I could find, right? Of course, microphones, tape, commercial synthesizers, processors, MIDI gear. And later, I was used the UPEAK system, Xenakis, and the Mars workstation at GRL. So I was making TIC music, to say electroacoustic music on fixed media, which is really, so anyway, but it was really Max that was like the great liberation. When I discovered Max, it gave me the freedom to do what I wanted, to explore and experiment and to compose the sound itself. So I found that when I wanted to work freely with sound, I needed to build the tools and the instruments myself. And Max allowed me to do that. Of course, it could have been another programming language, but it happened to be Max. So in a perfectly natural, organic way, imagining and inventing and building the instrument became simply a part of the compositional process. And of course, I wrote various programs for various projects: fragmenters, granulators, time stretchers, vocoders, spatializers, spectral processors, cross synthesis, blah blah blah, various things. I'm never trying to imitate something, but just trying to exploit the potential that I found in a process. And going on in this way, I discovered some lovely techniques for distortion that I used in several pieces in the, I don't know, maybe from 2002 to 2008. Well, still. But, and now I can plug this. Oh, it's already plugged. So, I can do it. So, where are you? Okay. So I made this super patch in Max, where I put together a collection of these various processes that I had come across, and I just go through. I just mentioned them quickly. And of course, I did this in Max 4, and this is an image that I took a few days ago using Max 5, and so that's why the type is all. I don't know if I have a copy of Max 4 anymore. Anyway. So various kinds of simple wave shaping, clipping, amplifying clip, the classical, folding and wrapping. So the same process, folding, that is amplifying, and then what goes beyond the threshold is folded down, something like that, or wrapping, so what goes over the upper threshold comes back from the lower threshold. Rectifying, so I learned later it had a name, just absolute value. Reducing the resolution, so downsampling and bit reduction. Some arbitrary mathematical operations. I should probably look here. Some arbitrary mathematical operations, like taking the square root, or taking the cosine, the delta. Scrambling the digital data, bit shift. Bit shifting, and division. And division was a wonderful discovery for me, because, for instance, if you divide by 0, right. I'll come back to that. If you divide by 0.1, you multiply by 10. Okay, so you get huge amplitudes, which I clipped. So, but I divided by. Oh yeah, I have another image because here, okay, here are the various processes, and these are the various divisors that I worked with. So various signals that could be, like a sine wave, pulse wave, random, and another sound file. And that was really lovely. So, let me see if these are open. Yes. Okay, actually now I can go into mirroring. It's going to be complicated. But we may as well see these images. Turn that on. So, here are just a few examples. Yeah. Sorry. So, okay, let me see if I have it. Yes. So taking this sound file and dividing it by something. I don't know what. Dividing it by something else. Taking this sound. Again, dividing up by I'm not sure what. Is it too loud?
No.
Like that. Okay. So it just produced these fantastically rich and deep sounds that are just completely fascinating me, and still do. A couple other examples of just some different processing. I work in a couple of pieces. I worked with like these cello samples and also samples from in another piece, whatever. Persepolis. Xenakis is Persepolis. So. So passing that through a square root. Running that through some bit shift or other. We're running this through some bit shift or other. more because I love these sounds. Also because this really was taking this and dividing it by this. Gave me this. And so on. So this, I can control this myself. So this, of course, I loved all the processes, but I found that this dividing was really, really like my favorite. It was really the richest one because, of course, the divisor. When I say divide this sound file by that sound file, I mean, I don't know how clear it is. Oh no, I just have speed, that's all. I'm not sure what fine means. Oh, that's the speed control. Yeah, just slow it down, often. Because you get, well, there's ring modulation if I multiply two sound files, or two signals, and this is just the inverse. And so you have the imprint of both sounds in this incredibly distorted and, well, rich thing. So anyway, this idea of dividing by zero became really like sort of central to my thinking about making music, about what I wanted to do. And it actually became the title for a CD that I put out on Sub Rosa. Because, and sort of as a concept, as an idea, because I mean, it's just evoked dividing by zero. Well, you can't do it; it's impossible. But it's not really impossible; it's just invalid. It's against the rules. You're doing something that doesn't make sense in the world of mathematics. And if you could do it, and why you can't, the result would be infinity. And I found this this became sort of emblematic for me of the importance of not playing by the rules and of acting like as an outlaw or an outsider, and now I could say as a heretic. And because by not playing by the rules, there's like infinite possibilities that are open, that are before we close down. So subsequently, I refined, so to speak, and developed these techniques of this sort of harsh distortion. And through a few pieces, particularly specifically one live performance piece called Head Transplant Experiment, which, oh no, I have to mirror again. Turn, mirroring on, yeah. Which I have to open in max 5. Because with max 6, the behavior of bit shift changed. And it became like, how can we say English? Soft. It just didn't have that bite or that edge that it has in max 5. And I didn't ever get to the bottom of, because I could just open it in max 5. The bottom of it. I know that I could do something to make it the same, but anyway, what do I have to do here? Turn this on, see if I have. So I have any sound. I don't. Oh, right, because I don't have the sound card. Fanculo. Max 5 doesn't update when you plug the sound. I'm so used to everything updating now. Okay, max 5. Oh, it worked this way. All right. It's been so long. I think this should work. Oh, let's find out. So, oh yeah, no, I remember this too. Max 5. When I changed the sound card, sorry, it has trouble when I change the sound card. So what I have to do is open up the patch. I even wrote this. I have a score for this piece, by the way. And on the score, I wrote, first open up the piece, choose the driver, turn the DAC on, and maybe, oh no, that may be the phone. I have to read the score. Yeah, I have to quit before, and then it will be, yeah, okay. I'll get there. Max 5. So, open that. This is better. Okay, check this thing. Brilliant. So, dun, dun. So this piece, I'm just gonna. It's a live performance piece, which I'm not gonna perform live, but in making the piece, it's very. There's a trajectory. There's a route, and I made presets for different states. So I'm just going to sample a few states. This is the first one, but I gradually open a filter, and I do everything with iPad, so I can't find where the controls are. But I gradually open this filter. Here, the cue. I gradually bring the cue. And that wasn't enough. Okay, but anyway, I gradually open these filters, and then we end up somewhere like here. Output matrix 1, 2. It's really not very quiet. It's just not. What have I done? I just checked this part. I have output. This is my output. This is my output. It's doing what it's supposed to do. Let me just try something else. Oh, I didn't change it. Hot. It's a lot louder than that. So yeah, so what I have is just two sound files that is reading at variable speeds, often very, very slow. You'll see later. I'm just going through these processes, which are square root cosine with all sorts of variants, bit shift, and division. And then through filters and a limiter. There we go. So ending down on some things like this. So I did a lot of this noise stuff, and maybe in context where it wasn't what I was supposed to do. That was a commission with GRM. It may have even been a commande d'état. The other one was a commande d'état, that is with the cello stuff. That was commissioned by the French Ministry of Culture. And
When?
and by GRM. And this was a GRM commission.
A double one.
But it's kind of like, sometimes people have said like that was provocation, and it surprises me. Somebody said that about some concert we gave a few months ago. I was like, oh, no, I'm just innocent. I'm just doing what I do. You asked me to do some music, and this is what I did. Not trying to hurt anybody. It happens. So skip ahead because it did various other sorts of things like reading sound file, reading programs as sound file data in various ways, working with the malfunction of a computer where it's not working and it's making some interesting sound, doing stuff like that, and in two 2016, I wrote a piece for saxophone quartet with electronics. Which is called Vortex, and is commissioned and performed by Quasar, which is a fantastic quartet in Montreal. And the resolution changed a lot of stuff. And for this piece, I developed some various let's say unconventional processing, and I think I'm out of time already.
1 minute.
Let's see. Okay, let me just show you one thing, which I think I can find. There's various spectral processing. And this one is the most extreme, so I'll show it. I asked them to play like this. So I wanted to step through all some of the different processes, but that's just one of them, spectral based, and there's some others that are not spectral based. But let me just give you a quick sampling, because when they play it, it's better, of course, because they are playing the electronics. And it's something like, something like this. Let me start that over. Because I have a video. I see, I lost it. Okay. Because I have a video, but anyway, I have a better mix. So, yeah. Well, yeah, it was. So, aside from talking more about these processes, I wanted to show you this stuff, but I won't. I'll just say that what it is for live performance, working with piezo exciters, feedback, inductor, feedback, magnetic feedback, going through max processing, which gives a real gestural material connection with the sound that I'm generating, which is real nice. I'll stop.
Teasing maybe.
No, I don't care. If you want to, I take 10 minutes and show you that. It's up to you. I don't know how long this is.
Could we do something like the ones who wants to go for lunch? And the ones who want to scratch the time for lunch? How do you feel?
Okay.
You don't
Okay,
want
I'll make it fast, as fast as possible. First, I have to change the path from Max to Russ, away from Vortex. There we go. Then I go with Max. This up. The channels are fine. Make sure we're still working. Yes. So, I have to look at my notes. I forget what I said. I said, I just need because I have some presets that I just facilitate things if I call up the right preset. Oh, okay. So, make sure I have it. So using piezo, then obviously not as a microphone to mic an instrument, but as the instrument itself. So I do a lot of things with different textures. I won't bother doing too much. What did I just do? Okay. Yeah. Oh, I just killed my output. I control everything with a couple of iPads, so I have a hard time finding my faders. So, working with different sounds of this nature, let me just change the display here so it's more interesting. And sending the output, the input back to the output. It's a little bit delicate. So, I mean, and it's real wonderful because you become literally part of the feedback circuit. It's like and also going through, I can change because I said it was better like this. Also going through other objects. So that was technique 2. Technique 3 is working then with inductors, and I said start with, excuse me, this one. First, personification. Just the computer. It's really magic. I mean, we have a piece I say we. I play in a duo with Jean-François Laporte, and the duo is called Rust. So we have a piece called Le Chant des Machines, so machine song. So just picking up the magnetic fields of the gear that I have. And then, hold on, I have to just check. I told myself which presets to use for this. Helsinki, oh wait. Then any other presets I feel, okay. In addition, the same idea, feedback. This time it's magnetic. No, I won't even explain. I'll say why. You either know or you don't. Or that's what this is. La bobina, which is just a coil, just like what's inside of here and what's inside of here, just bigger. And in this, for this feedback, the processing is essential. Here's my wet dry. That was enough. You know what it's going to do? It's just going to do that and get louder. So the processing, without going into any details, just to say very, very quickly, the essence of the processing is here. There's a bank of bandpass filters with envelope followers on each of them, and the delay times are controlled by the amplitudes in a really flexible way. So either the delay times get longer when the amplitude gets greater or shorter, or so on and so forth. But it's that makes the thing humanly possible. And there's also, well, who cares? So.
Makes it machinely possible.
So let me just play you two other sounds and then I'll stop. I say two. Just changing the preset. Oh yeah. I need to adjust the levels. This is 5. Weep. That's output 4. I'll need to adjust the levels.